I believe you cannot become a great Pokemon player until you have had an existential crisis over your metagame of choice, or in many cases, metagames of choice. That's when you really become elite, when you are having crises over multiple tiers. Or if you switch from one tier to another to escape the crisis you're having in the first tier. So you say, "Oh well, I better go look at this other tier for a while. I'll see it with fresh eyes. Everything seems possible, ripe for innovation over there. And then I know when I get sick of that one, I can go back to the first one, and then I'll see it with new eyes." But the fact is that you are going to have that crisis if you are really dedicated to any metagame. And it's funny because you can, this crisis comes as a result of you really understanding the tier. Now, you're standing a little too close to it, so your understanding is clouded by your vision at the time. But if you've never experienced such a thing, basically what you go through is you think everything in the tier is completely unviable and completely broken at the same time. It sounds ridiculous, but if you know, you know, right? But basically, it partially comes from really and truly understanding the tier, like I said, and you do see it very clearly. And at the time, it seems perfectly rational. And I mean, the real-life parallels are just, flowing out of every sentence at this point. So here are your life lessons. But if you want some of those. But the idea is that, yes, you see things very clearly. You really understand the tier, but you're too close to the sun, So, it is why the case of Arctic Breeze in Advance is so fascinating to me, because I've seen a lot of great players have a lot of crises over a lot of tiers, but his in Advance is taken to an extreme, perhaps too much to an extreme, so much so that perhaps the problem isn't really there, but I definitely relate to it. I think it's not just as simple, my issues with Advance, as much as I love it and as much as it's an amazing tier, but he has the same crisis for such a long time now that I'm kind of wondering what's going on there. I mean, I'm not sure I fully agree with it, of course, but I would like to investigate to see how much truth there is to it, because even, exaggerated crises and insanity, then they tend to have something to them. It's kind of like Insane in the Rain music. You have to pass through it to become a great player. Okay, whatever. I just wanted to say I'm using his music again. So check him out. He's fantastic. Him and his collaborators. My goodness, what a tremendous bunch of musicians. Anyway, so yeah, I had a drum teacher. I went to this music school when I was a teenager, and then I went into the mental hospital for a while, so I didn't take my lessons. And I came back, and usually he was like this he was like this super accomplished jazz drummer, and he was usually like really hard on me, but when I came out of the hospital, he was so nice, and he was like, you can't be a great drummer unless you go to the crazy ward at least once. And I don't know if he was just being nice if he really meant it, or, maybe both. Anyway, yeah, so I'm not saying the same thing applies to, being good at competitive Pokemon, because, there are plenty of players who, never really broke a sweat over it. But I'm saying if you really want to understand the tier, you might have to risk it driving you a little bit insane. Wow, it's like art. Wow, holy crap, cow crazy. Did you guys know I'm making a movie? Yeah. Anyway, so the crisis in particular, I can't believe I'm going to get to the actual crisis at hand before the 5-minute mark. This is absolutely atrocious. Talk about selling out. Anyway, so Arctic's crisis is that he believes that Spike's... Well, first of all, I'll give my perspective on where this is coming from. Arctic's crisis is that he believes that Spike's teams are so much better than non-Spike's teams. That's where all the matchup issues in the tier come from. I'm not so extreme, but To me, Advance is, like many old gens, and honestly just tiers I like in general, it tends to be a great tier because the standards are strong without being broken. And so if you have a good team, you will match up into other standard stuff well, and you'll be able to outplay it. Now, there is going to be some stuff that's stronger than other stuff, obviously. When I was learning Advanced, I used to bother this great player from the Net Battle days named G80, or Gene. And I'm pretty sure this was partially to get me off his case. But he was like, yeah, I use Skarmory on every team. It just counters too much. Now, it wasn't quite that extreme. I didn't quite take that to heart, but because I got it. He was making fun of all the new trends of Advance. Some he was right to, some not so much. But so I always try to see the truth in the statements being made, no matter their ideological biases. Like, oh, those boomers, oh, these new players. So, okay, I'm going to change this because while I appreciate the talent here, the lyrics are going to get in the way. So, what should we do? Yeah, we'll go to Lava Ridge Town because this is about Gen 3. So, yes. So, while I do not share Arctic's extreme vision on the Spikes matter, I understand in that the basic tenet of the belief of, and just of extreme matchup stuff, this tier is broken, everything sucks, kind of viewpoints, are the idea that there are the standards, and then there are the teams that kind of go out of their way to try and deal with the standards, and the varying levels of how much you do that is how you get into more extreme, risky kinds of teams, and then more extreme, risky kinds of matchups, and then that's what really drives you crazy, when your opponent will, or just might, bring something that is actually terrible into half the metagame. And, why would they do that? Why are they risking automatically losing if I bring insert Pokemon I could very feasibly bring? But, you can't stop them from doing it. So, obviously, the way to deal with something like that, for me, is to not try to predict how they're going to counter team me, but just bring something that is generally good, but that keeps like potential counter team stuff in mind. One example I like to use is 5 years ago when I was playing Advanced and SPL, and I was certain I was going to meet some like Magdoll stuff to counter my Scar and Bliss fun. I decided, well, I want to use Scar and Bliss because it's too good not to use, almost. Borderline broken. But if I face Magdoll, I want to be this combination of Magneton and Claydol, for those who don't know, which is a very difficult combination to put on a team because you are then struggling to fit everything else you want in those 4 slots. Not that Mag and Claydol don't do a lot, but if you've built advanced teams, and even if you don't, then you haven't built advanced teams, you might know that covering everything with 6 defensively good slots is difficult. And as soon as you put a Magneton on any kind of team, you really feel the burden of how much its non-presence defensively drags you down. Yeah, you switch it into like Arrow, Rock Slides, and Double Edges, and CB Mets HP Flyings, and like Meteor Mash HP Bug. It's still not a Pokemon that you put on a team and say, okay, now I'm good into this. It's more a Pokemon whose defensive capabilities gives you flexibility in battle, rather than something that checks off the necessary boxes in team building. Anyway, so yeah, I was being wary of Magdoll, so I used a Scar and Bliss team with Hariyama on it. Of course I did, because that let me have my cake and eat it too. A phrase I'm crazy about. Because if they don't bring the hardcore Scar and Bliss counter team, I'm good to go. And if they do, then I have Hariyama, which completely dissects them. So this is the kind of, forget the specifics. In more of an abstract sense, this is the kind of thing that you shoot for in general. Bring your good stuff, but be wary of how they might try to take advantage of it, and, have a plan so that if your main strategy gets shut down, then you will have something else that you're not going to have to figure it out on the fly. You'll have something else you're going to not even fall back on, you're just going to go with. yeah, it's in that sense, it's not really that different from, don't hinge your entire team on your SD Lucario sweeping late game in Gen 4. No matter how well built your team is to support Lucario sweep, sometimes they will just have too many checks to it, and trying to sweep with Lucario is not the best win plan. You got to look for something else, and to look for something else, you got to have something else. So, in that sense, then sure, but as people, become very, very aware of, the kind of dynamics present in the tier, then a lot of them go, and personally, this is not something I would do, because I think it's silly to take the ability to play the game out of your hands like this, but they go more and more extreme in their counter-teaming desires. Or even just forget counter-teaming one opponent in particular. It also tends to be, just innovating too much. Which, I mean, forget tournament pressure. Everyone has done that. Every great player has gone like, oh yeah, this set I came up with is just going to revolutionize everything. And then they're like, oh, actually, this was the dumbest thing ever. What was I thinking? So this is definitely not specific to having a metagame crisis. That's almost a nice effect of being so involved in a tier that you start coming up with crazy, insane music nonsense that you because if you're willing to think of stuff like that, then that means you probably have the capacity to come up with the next thing that I even forget revolutionizing the metagame, just the next thing that is going to work. To find those things that work, then you're going to have to risk finding things that don't work, and it can be a process. Now, the thing with Arctic, and I hope he doesn't mind me using him as an example, because I have a lot of respect for him as a player and as a team builder, as an innovator. But this SPL, I noticed he'd always been creative, and he liked to counter team his opponents a lot. But in this SPL, he was really going insanely far with it. And I understand where it comes from. It comes from a place of really understanding the tier like few other people do. I wouldn't say that he understands it too much, because I don't really believe in that concept. But if there was such a thing, he would be an example of it. And he knows how to play, he knows how to team build, but he almost lets his own clear sight get in the way. Or I guess his clear sight lets him... when he sees too much, he tries to perceive too much. And it's not even a matter of trying to counter everything perfectly all at once, because that doesn't really work no matter what tier or generation you're in. But it's more about trying too specifically, well, as far as I understand anyway, trying too specifically to pick your, not even pick your battles, but just, basically making sure you automatically win in insert matchup here, and then leaving yourself without the flexibility of the adapting to your opponent not bringing something exactly like this. Because no matter how good your prep is, and I know a lot of people like to flatter themselves with their reading of their opponent's preparation habits, but that is the most confirmation bias thing ever. And everyone seeks confirmation bias, as my old professor used to say. But I think a lot of it is, if not, baloney pseudoscience, it's risky. But, this kind of thing that Arctic tends to do, where he overdoes it, I feel like he's talked about it too, but it comes from a place of, deep crisis, like Ingmar Bergman, Winter Light era. Those who hear that will immediately understand, and for those who don't, then please look it up. It's soul-destroying stuff. And it comes from a place of deep crisis of, overthinking, of course. But, okay, I'll stop trying to repeat myself. But it's being thought of in the sense that at its very base, the whole setup of the tier's dynamics is so imperfect that you have to do this. And I remember I asked him at one point, I don't remember what he said, I don't remember if he even responded, maybe he didn't, but I was like, Arctic, it feels like you have such a crisis over the very dynamic at the heart of Advance that, drives all team building. Why do you still play it? And, it's a tough question to answer, considering this is what life is, why do you do, XYZ? It could be applied to anything. But in the stricter sense of it, I think, it's not too dissimilar to, when I would still play Black and White, even though I had lots and lots of issues with it. Because underneath it all, there is a sense that, so here in the chat, sorry, at the end of this last game, this one was actually bad. It's just going too far. Because when I was at my most hating of Black and White, then I got the sense there was a great metagame underneath it, and the frustration came from, how I wanted to get to that great metagame, and yet had to fight through all this nonsense. So, I don't know if it's just like a difference in the routes you take to get there. But, man, so the Spikes problem is that basically Spikes teams are... having Spikes is better than not having Spikes, which, you could make this case for GSC more than you could Advance, in my opinion, but I understand the premise. And even if I don't necessarily... that is true in the sense of more hazards is obviously better, but it's the costs of getting them up, obviously, that the nuances tend to enter the equation. But what this really winds up doing is getting to the point where you start... I don't know if you're over dividing everything into, categories like, spikes good, spikes not good, no spikes good, no spikes not good, but no spikes good is still worse than spikes good, if that makes sense. And it's trying to, not even oversimplify, because that's clearly not what's being done. It's kind of the opposite of that. But it's not overcomplicating things either. It's trying to find too clear an answer to something whose answers are often found not on the fly, but like through flexibility. And in spite of doing this, then applying a rather rigid, restricting approach, which, tends to not work out, tends to backfire big time. So, in short, you could say, the Spikes problem leads to these insanely high risk, insanely high reward things, but the risk-reward ratio of it actually working out is very skewed, in my opinion. So, I don't know. It's everyone who's gone through a serious advanced phase has had this. About 10 years ago, a lot of top advanced players were talking about, if not banning spikes, then, limiting it to 1 layer, even 2 layers, because 2 layers famously sucks. I made a video about this. I don't know if you know. So everyone's gone through this, but, Arctic has taken it, the hardest of any advanced player I've seen. I think really the healthiest response is just to have a cycle of good teams you like in different styles, and without necessarily sacrificing your... we got here again. I guess we might have gone through... Did we really? That was short. Let's go to... Oh, these are... these are Gen 3. Actually, let's... it's not without sacrificing standards, because I think you should have a bunch of good teams that you like that aren't just settling. Like, I wouldn't bring, X team style, or I wouldn't have X team style just so I have X team style if I don't think the style is actually good, So yeah, Arctic had a very rough start. I think he was clearly really struggling, which I empathize with. It. Every great player has had a really, really, really bad tournament where they just forgot how to play, forgot how to build, forgot how to win. You know, even when things were going well, it just the collapse felt imminent. It's just bad headspace, and a lot of Pokemon is about headspace. It's one reason why Earthworm was so good for so long, because he never seemed to be in a bad headspace. He was like immune to making mistakes almost. And then even he had, a really, really bad tournament, and he was washed up, and he went away for a while, and when he came back, he was great. But, everyone just burns out almost. So, again, it's not even about the specifics of the spikes problem as much as I thought that was what was going to, the case was going to be when I started this video. But I guess I found it along the way. See, look at that. This exact thing, and I thought it was going to be. Oh, well, it's about talk about. Wow, how fitting. But yeah, the spikes thing itself is that what I do find accurate is, of course, that Skarmory teams are the most reliable. I've talked about this on the channel many, many times, where I say, Skarmory teams are obviously the best, always have been the best. It's pretty much a fundamental truth of advance. Like, when it comes down to it, the other styles are cool and great even, but Skarmory is just the best, which, makes sense. There is going to be a best, and Skarmory happens to be it. It's why people put it number 1 on the viability rank, or at least they used to. I don't know if they still do. And of course, even if you're not scarming, then you often are spiking. Those styles are very good. Although I think I would take some other styles without spikes over non-scarm spikes in a lot of cases. Because it's not just about the spikes, it's about the Skarmory. You can get very quick, easy spikes with Smeargle sometimes, but it's not always worth it because you are throwing away the Pokemon. And, it's not like Stealth Rock and DPP and onward. So, yeah, with that in mind, then I understand because I've gone through this cycle before where I want to use nothing but Skarm, and then people start using increasingly stupid things to try and, counter team. And I'm like, well, what are you guys doing? You're ruining the experience, and the teams are bad. And then, eventually I get over myself and I start using some other stuff, and then it more or less evens out. But once I take the step to either step back, go over to DPP for a while, or just, get over myself and, mix it up a little bit, without even going away from Skarm sometimes, just, using what's-his-face, using something to support the Skarm, but yeah, Clear Head helps, but, you get too close and you're going to go crazy. Yeah, that's basically it for me, I think. So Arctic, had a very rough start to this SPL, but then he started winning. So I want to show some of those, just because he is a great player, and really a singular mind for the game. And I feel bad for showing all those losses, but I wanted to show where it was coming from, and so now I think it's only fair that we look at some of his better moments as well. So, yeah, like, actually, I'm trying to not repeat myself as much these days. Also, it's getting late, so we're just gonna watch this replay and enjoy. I think the spikes versus non-spikes thing, it's almost a red herring, like you think it's about, spikes team's good versus non-spikes team's bad, because I've noticed in the natural cycle of advance, like, yes, it's also partially people eventually just get... There were some people who used to use Stall all the time who I knew would never wind up using Stall later on because they were just so bored of using it. Not that means you should be prepared for Stall, obviously, because, otherwise you use a bad team, and, I'm never satisfied with using a team I think is bad. Even if I, regret it after going in, I shouldn't think it's bad. Ideally, you don't think it's bad afterwards, but, But yeah, like the natural cycle of advance, sometimes some things are more dominant, and a lot of it can just be, getting bored of stuff, and people pretend that Skarmbliss sucks for a while before they stop pretending out of boredom. Bored Manor Syndrome, BMS, I have a video on that. But a lot of it is also like people get into a groove with. A few years ago, actually, people were obsessed with Zap Doug, lead Zapdos sub BPing to Doug Trio and trapping Blissey with beat up, can't even counter it, and like literally with the move counter. And also, it was uncounterable, right? So, perfect. And people were genuinely like, oh, the style is broken. And I was like, Zapdos and Doug Trio has been around for a while. People really like it now. It's great. Of course it's great. But it's still, And then eventually people went the other way and started saying, oh, Zap Doug sucks now. Zap Doug is terrible. I'm like, the combination of Zapdos and Doug Trio and other special attackers has always been good, is good now, will continue to be good. Forget this nonsense of is bad now. Come on. So part of it is like that. But part of it, the part that's truthful to it, right? Because, people are often very bad at knowing what they want and explaining why they like things. And like even just today, I talked to my dad on the phone. And he was like, oh, you see, the new Mission Impossible yet? And I'm like, no, but I'm really excited to. I haven't had time, but I'm going to go see it in IMAX. I can't wait. I don't know when, but sooner the better. And he's like, oh, yeah, I don't like Tom Cruise. And I'm like, why? He's like, oh, I don't know. I just wish he'd go away. And I'm like, why should he go away? And I'm like, I don't know. And, he's usually a pretty intelligent guy, but like something like this, he just cannot explain himself. So, and I've noticed this is the case for a lot of people, where you really have to. Sometimes I feel, well, that was almost insanely arrogant, what I just, okay, whatever, I'll say it anyway, because I get accused of being arrogant anyway. No, sometimes I feel like I understand what people want better than they do, and I know I'm insightful and everything, but I think it's less me being insightful and more them just being unable to articulate it, because it seems incredibly obvious. I don't know, maybe they're afraid of their own feelings or whatever. But before we get too existential, regarding the whole Zap Doug phenomenon we were just talking about, because if it's not Zap Doug, then it could be it could be Skarm Bliss and friends, right? And the Spikes problem again. So, regardless of that, then you have the truthful part of it, that the people themselves aren't going to say, they're not going to say, or even the parts that they understand, or articulate, or whichever, how much of each it is, up to debate. But while they may say, oh well, Zapdug destroys everything right now, and then Zapdug sucks against everything right now, and it's the same metagame effectively, then the part that's truthful is sometimes people just get into a groove with these styles, and it's almost a palpable thing. It's weird because it seems so intangible, and yet it is very, very palpable. And that part, I won't deny at all. Sometimes, a style is just working, and then there is a natural evolution, to, against, with, for that. So, but I don't think it's as extreme as those hyperbole statements, which seem to be made without any intent of them being hyperbole. Intent or awareness, I don't know. But, yeah. So, I think that kind of stuff is the more natural or, healthy way of, Skarm stuff versus non-Skarm stuff. Or Spikes versus non-Spikes, even though I think it's more Skarm than not Skarm. If you took Skarm out of the tier, I really doubt you have this whole, Fortress and Cloyster and Smeargle are crushing everything kind of deal, Roselia. So, yeah. That's, I don't know, I think it's pretty nuts to... But again, it's nuts, but at the same time, it makes complete sense. Because of the phenomenon, I've been talking about here nonstop, where getting too close, it is kind of like a cousin to Board Manor syndrome, BMS, again, video on it, where you just, but that's more a case of I'm sick of using good stuff and I'm bored, which of course is also mentioned with the people who get sick of Skarm Bliss and then go around saying it's bad. when nothing has changed, and then when Scar Bliss does show up, it still wins, and then they still call it bad. I don't know. I don't know how much of it is just general internet contrarianism, one of my least favorite things in the world. But, yeah. Anyway, that is, I'm really starting to repeat myself now, I think, but I think I'm also, making points, whatever. So, this is some tasty, tasty stuff from Insane in the Rain. Much thanks to him for making his music available for us to use in our videos. Yeah, I think I've made the points. Oh, that's a rough couple of full paras into flinch. Oh, there's a miss. Oh, there's another para. Hey, there's another miss. Oh, yeah. Pokemon. Okay, so while we're finishing this replay, I will just mention, because I'm really tired and it's after midnight, and I think I've made the points. So now I will, and my Pokemon brain is just disappearing. So I'll just mention some stuff I've been watching recently. Even this is causing me a lot of exertion. Okay. I watched Jesus Christ, I'm sorry, I just totally blanked. Okay, I watched a film from Hong Kong called Dangerous Encounters of the First Kind. I really loved it. I wrote about it on Letterboxd, actually, because I was so taken with, I heard it was insane. And a lot of movies get described as insane, but the short version is that, no, this is like one of those movies that you hear about as insane, but rather than like petering out and being unable to sustain its insanity, this one just gets more insane over time. There are very, very few films like this. I really enjoyed that one. I liked David Cronenberg's new film, The Shrouds. I thought it was... I'm kind of mixed on Cronenberg. He's kind of like Brian De Palma for me in that he has a lot of great ideas but doesn't always sustain them throughout the course of the film. And they can both be kind of like strangely dry considering how known for their creativity they are. And, sometimes overly expository in a lot of cases. But I really liked the flat affect of Cronenberg's, late style, starting with Cosmopolis, which I really enjoyed. So I really enjoyed The Shrouds, this new one with Vincent Cassel and an excellent Diane Kruger. A lot of stuff worked for it, and I did think it had its flaws, of course, but I think even its flaws ultimately it was a very intelligent one, and I liked it a lot. I liked this 1978 horror movie called Terror, which, the most obvious title ever, but it was directed by Norman J. Warren, and at first it's like kind of generic, and you're like, oh, it's a bad Suspiria I try to say knockoff and ripoff at the same time. And then it turns into a really good, not even a Suspiria knockoff, just its own very, it's inspired by those old Italian horror movies, to be sure, but it's definitely its own kind. I really enjoyed it. I watched a spaghetti western from 1967 called The Big Gun Down. I think a lot of people who aren't really into movies or westerns, they've still seen things like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, or even like A Fistful of Dollars. For a few dollars more, it gets overlooked. That's actually my favorite in the trilogy. But yeah, this stars Lee Van Cleef, who is, of course, a big star in those spaghetti westerns. And it's directed by Sergio Salima, who has some other films I want to see. Does he? Okay, maybe he doesn't. But I'm mixing up my Italian directors because there are a lot of Italian movies I want to see. I loved 1933's Babyface, starring my love, Barbara Stanwyck. Oh my goodness, she's wonderful. I really liked Kenneth Lonergan's You Can Count on Me. So that was getting a Blu-ray release recently, and I was like, hey, I'll check that one out, because I really liked Manchester by the Sea and Margaret. Maybe we're going to rewatch Margaret, actually, but You Can Count on Me is really good. Excellent Mark Ruffalo performance. I've actually been having some rewatches recently. I watched Rear Window with my grandma because I rewatched Vertigo, and then I was at my grandma's. And I was like, hey, let's watch something. And with my grandma, we like to watch old stuff. And she was like, oh, I don't think I've seen this. And then at the end, she was like, I did see this a long time ago, but I didn't remember. But it was great. Obviously, I loved Rear Window the second time around more than the first. And then I just recently I rewatched North by Northwest, which really, really loved that, and also a little more than the first time. Yeah, some other rewatches too, but I got to see Bonnie and Clyde for the first time in a theater. Oh, that was terrific. Yeah, since Gene Hackman passed, I got to see not just Bonnie and Clyde, but French Connection and Unforgiven in the same theater as well. French Connection was on 35mm. It was incredible. And some other stuff. Recently, a new friend of mine and I, friend from Mexico, I was like, hey, I've never seen Y Tu Mama Tambien, and that's why I watched it. So I really enjoyed it. I think I might have mentioned that in a recent video, but yeah, it was great. Yes, so my watching has really slowed down recently with how busy I've been. I mean, by my standards, but it's been a while. I really enjoyed a 1954 Japanese film called An Inn at Osaka by Hainosuke Gosho. That was a really good one, I thought. And that whole like Mizoguchi Ozu style tradition, Naruse as well. I really want to watch this film from Naruse, A Woman's Life. Yeah. Oh, Nine Souls by Toshiaki Toyota. I really like that one. I've liked a lot of his films that I've seen, and this one was one of the best. I liked this Chinese piece of slow cinema called Winter Vacation from 2010 by Lee Honki. I'm pronouncing that badly. I know it sounded like I said honky, which... but yeah, that was really good. And, I watched the 3 Paul Thomas Anderson films I had yet to see, starting with Inherent Vice, which I mentioned recently as liking, Phantom Thread, which I wasn't crazy on, but then that argument scene came around in the middle where Daniel Day-Lewis started acting like my dad, actually. He's like, oh, do you have a gun? Are you going to shoot me? Are you going to shoot me? And meanwhile, his girlfriend's just, trying to have a normal conversation with him. And I was like, that is freakishly like my dad. Not the, gun part, but, he would say things like that all the time. And then I saw his first film, Hard 8, which I also, at first I was like, oh, this is okay. And then it really kicked into gear, and I really enjoyed it. And on Saturday, I went to the theater to see a 35mm print of a Hungarian film, which I really enjoyed, called My 20th Century, which... very, very interesting, very unique, and I think I've got to let it linger in my memory a little more. But overall, I did quite like it. Had some real stunners of sequences, and I wasn't sure about it, but it was the kind of uncertainty, a good kind of uncertainty. And yeah, so. Yeah, and speaking of Cronenberg and De Palma being strangely dry and flat, then I rewatched Body Double with someone the other night. Maybe I shouldn't. Whatever. But yeah, and parts of it I really liked, and other parts of it made me go, reinforced my theory that De Palma fans are a little too enthusiastic and I love his movies, but he's. Like, the scenes where they just, stand and talk at each other. Like, of all guys, De Palma should be the most allergic to scenes of standing and talking not just standing and talking, but standing and exposition dumping to the audience. Good lord, this last game is going to take forever. I'm sorry, but I'm not sticking around for the full edition of this. Rest Raikou into Sandless Blissey? Are you serious? Well, Hariyama just flinched Sableye 3 times with the rock slide, but... Oh, he ran out of... Did he run... What? Oh, no, now the Raikou is sweeping. So, yeah, looks like Arctic won, came back and won 4 in a row, so big props to him. So he started off 0-4 and then won 4 in a row. And how'd the last one go? Well, okay, this is a reasonably paced game. So, we'll just look at this. Well, Blissy's staying in and Seismic tossing the Lax. It's cursing twice as T-Tar comes in. I was a big fan of MTG Xerxes in the Wi-Fi days when I was, before I was even COPPA legal. And I saw this one comment on one of his videos where they said, your narration is so good, I can literally not even watch the video, and I know exactly what's happening in the battle, and that always stuck with me. Anyway, so, oh yeah, okay, I guess this is a great way to cap this thing off, in that, okay, what just happened for those who listen and don't, we listen and we don't watch, yeah, so Arctic is having, like, a Spikes crisis, right? And so what he does is he has a Fortress and a Cloister on the same team. And what was even more insane was that this Snorlax already had 2 curses under its belt when the Fori switched in. And then he spiked on it twice as a curse twice more, and then exploded on it with Fori and did 34%. And he then sent in Cloister and set up the 3rd layer of spikes, and Snorlax body slammed, and the Cloister barely lived, but then died to sand. So he just sacrificed 2 Pokemon to get up 3 layers of spikes, and give Snorlax 2 more curses, and it's still at barely under half health. And then Aerodactyl comes in and crits it with Rock Slide, so he gets out of it. Oh my god. But now Claydol comes in Rapid Spin, so it could have been a lot worse. But gee, what a seriously ridiculous set of turns. But I guess that kind of summarizes, in its own roundabout way, the Spikes crisis of it all. You know, running not just 2 Spikers, because Skarm Fori has been used before, but Fori and Cloister, 2 Spikers and Spinners, really, because one of the major changes that came in the Smogon Tour years of Advance, when it first started getting seriously played again after it was no longer the current gen, then one of the major changes was that previously during the net battle era, people said the Spinners largely suck. I would rather play around spikes, play through spikes, or just hover above them, and then people coming in from Black and White and DPP and Advance, Black, White, and DPP, they were like, oh, well, I'm used to Stealth Rock being everywhere. Spikes is like that, right? And then they discover that Spikes is really strong, and rather than thinking, oh, well, Spikes is strong, but, not the end-all, be-all, then they say, oh, well, I need to have Spikes but usually I also need to make sure my opponent doesn't have spikes, and then Rapid Spin started getting taken seriously as a strategy, much more seriously than during Net Battle. Now, during Net Battle, you also had the thing where Substitute blocked the effect of Rapid Spin, so, okay. No wonder you weren't going to use it there, but still, the fact that Fortress was getting used was looked at laughably by many, and I still personally think that Fortress is terrible, but, yeah, and then it became this obsessive, I mean, this happened in every generation, pretty much, this obsession over, I gotta have spikes, and you can't have spikes, and you can't get rid of my spikes. I need the spike, the spin, and the ghost type, and the pursuiter for the opposing ghost, and potentially Rapid Spinner as well. Yeah, and then you get so wrapped up in the Hazard game that you kind of forget about the rest of the game, Not that Hazards can't win games on their own, but especially in Advance where it's just spikes, you can really, this happens all the time, You get 3 layers of spikes and then you still wind up losing to something like Suicune, which is affected by sand and spikes, and how did that happen? Oh, did they, clear the weather and remove your T-Tar and spin away the spikes? No, Suicune just bowled you over, so, yeah, although in the case here, there were no spikes left. But yes, so after a monstrously bad start to the season, Arctic came back admirably, and I really respect him for that, as well as, sticking to his vision of the game, even if that vision got clouded a little bit. Yeah, so I hope you have all enjoyed the points made here, and I look forward to reading the comments. So that is really it for me now. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.